In a small town surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The people there were used to the quiet hum of nature, the chirping of birds during the day and the soft rustle of leaves at night. Among them lived Jacob and Emma, a young couple who had grown up in the town and knew every corner of it like the back of their hands. They spent most evenings sitting on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and talking about simple things, what they would plant next spring or how much firewood they needed for winter. But lately, something felt wrong. Over the past few weeks, strange things had started happening. Livestock began disappearing from nearby farms without a trace. Chickens vanished from coops, cows wandered off into the woods, and even dogs seemed reluctant to go outside after dark. At first, everyone thought it was just wild animals, bears or coyotes. But the attacks grew stranger. Trees near the edge of the forest showed deep claw marks, as if some massive creature had been scratching at them. And then there was the silence. After sunset, the usual sounds of crickets and frogs faded away, leaving an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Jacob wasn't one to let fear get the better of him. He decided he needed to see for himself what was going on. One evening, while Emma tried to convince him to stay home, Jacob grabbed his flashlight and rifle and headed toward the woods. "I'll be fine," he said with a reassuring smile. "Probably just raccoons or something." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. The forest was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that pressed against you like a heavy blanket. Jacob's flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing twisted roots and gnarled trees. Every step he took felt louder than it should have, crunching leaves underfoot. He called out a few times, hoping to scare off whatever might be lurking, but no response came, not even the flutter of wings or the snap of a twig. Then he saw it, or rather, he didn't see it. He saw its eyes. Two glowing orbs floating in the blackness ahead, unblinking and unnatural. Jacob froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he raised his flashlight, trying to get a better look. As the light hit the source of those eyes, his breath caught. It wasn't an animal. At least, not any animal he'd ever seen before. Standing tall on spindly legs, the creature had a sleek, insect-like body covered in shimmering scales. Its head tilted slightly, studying him with an intelligence that sent chills down his spine. For a moment, neither moved. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, the creature darted sideways, vanishing into the shadows. Jacob stumbled backward, nearly dropping his flashlight. His mind raced. What had he just seen? Was it real? Before he could decide whether to follow or run, he heard a sound behind him, a low, guttural click that echoed unnaturally through the trees. Spinning around, he realized he wasn't alone. More pairs of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness, surrounding him. Panic set in. Jacob fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to scare them away. But the creatures only seemed more intrigued. Their clicking grew louder, forming a chorus that filled the forest. Backing away slowly, Jacob tripped over a root and fell hard onto the ground. By the time he scrambled to his feet, the eyes were closer, moving steadily toward him. Heart pounding, he turned and ran, leaving his rifle behind in his haste to escape. When he finally burst out of the woods and collapsed onto the dirt road leading back to town, he was shaking uncontrollably. He looked over his shoulder, half expecting the creatures to emerge from the trees, but they stayed hidden. Gasping for air, Jacob knew one thing for certain. The world he thought he understood had changed forever. Jacob's disappearance weighed heavily on Emma. She had waited all night for him to return, pacing back and forth across their small living room. When dawn broke, and he still hadn't come home, she knew something was terribly wrong. Her hands trembled as she dialed Matt, a former soldier who lived down the road. He was known for his calm demeanor and practical thinking, qualities that often made him the go-to person in times of trouble. "Matt, it's Emma," she said when he answered. "Jacob went into the woods last night, and he hasn't come back. I'm scared something's happened." Matt didn't waste time asking questions. "I'll gather some people and meet you at your place in 10 minutes. By the time Emma stepped outside, a small group had already formed. Along with Matt, Clara, a nurse with a sharp eye for details, and a few other neighbors stood ready to help. They'd brought flashlights, ropes, and even a couple of hunting rifles, though no one wanted to admit they might need them. Emma clutched Jacob's abandoned rifle tightly in her hands, feeling both fear and determination. The search began where Jacob had entered the forest. The ground showed signs of struggle: scuffed dirt, broken branches, and faint boot prints leading deeper into the woods. As they followed the trail, an uneasy silence settled over the group. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual, as if holding their breath. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made them jump, their nerves stretched thin. It wasn't long before they found something unsettling: deep gouges carved into tree trunks, too precise to be the work of any animal. Matt ran his fingers along the marks, frowning. "Whatever did this has claws like knives," he muttered. Emma's stomach churned. She couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes Jacob had described. Was it real, or had fear clouded his mind? She pushed the thought aside and kept moving forward. The trail eventually led them to a clearing where the grass was flattened, as if something large had rested there. In the center lay a strange, shimmering residue, almost like spilled oil, but glowing faintly in the morning light. "What is that?" Clara asked, crouching to examine it. She touched it cautiously with a stick, then recoiled. "It feels warm." Before anyone could respond, a low clicking sound echoed through the trees. Everyone froze, their eyes darting around. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged. Tall, slender creatures with elongated limbs stepped into view. Their bodies were covered in smooth, translucent scales that caught the light, and their wings shimmered like glass. But it was their eyes, large, unblinking, and glowing, that held the group's gaze. Emma instinctively stepped back, clutching Jacob's rifle tighter. Matt raised his own weapon, aiming carefully but not firing. For a moment, neither side moved. The creatures tilted their heads, studying the humans with an eerie curiosity. One of them emitted a series of rapid clicks, which the others responded to in kind. It sounded almost like a conversation, though none of the humans could understand it. "They're not attacking," Clara whispered, lowering her flashlight slightly. "Maybe they're just as confused as we are." Matt hesitated, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. "Let's not take chances," he replied. "Stay calm, but be ready." As the standoff continued, Emma noticed something peculiar. The creatures weren't focused on aggression. They seemed more interested in the humans' tools and equipment. One of them reached out tentatively toward Clara's backpack, its clawed hand hovering inches away. Clara flinched but didn't pull back. Instead, she slowly opened the bag and revealed a water bottle inside. The creature clicked again, this time softer, almost hesitant. "They're trying to communicate," Emma said softly, her voice trembling. "We can't fight them if they're not our enemies." Her words hung in the air as the group exchanged uncertain glances. Just then, Matt accidentally stepped closer to one of the nests hidden beneath moss-covered roofs. The reaction was immediate. The nearest creature let out a high-pitched screech that sent shockwaves through the clearing. Everyone dropped to their knees, clutching their ears as pain shot through their heads. When the sound finally stopped, the creatures retreated into the shadows, leaving the humans shaken and disoriented. Matt helped Emma to her feet, his expression grim. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now." As they hurried back toward town, Emma glanced over her shoulder one last time. The forest seemed darker than ever, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't ordinary animals, and humanity's encounter with them was far from over. Back in town, the group gathered in Emma and Jacob's house, trying to make sense of what they had seen. The encounter with the creatures left everyone shaken, but it also raised more questions than answers. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glowing residue she had carefully scraped off a leaf into a small jar. It shimmered faintly, even in the daylight, as if holding secrets only it could reveal. "We need to figure out what this stuff is," Emma said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. She slid the jar toward Rachel, a biology teacher who lived 2 streets over. Rachel wasn't a scientist, but she knew enough about nature to be useful. Rachel picked up the jar, turning it over in her hands. "It's strange," she said after a moment. "I've never seen anything like it, but I can take it to my classroom and look at it under a microscope. Maybe we'll find something." Matt paced the room, his rifle resting against the wall. He didn't trust the creatures, no matter how curious they seemed. "We can't just sit around and wait for them to come back," he said sharply. "They might have taken Jacob, or worse." Emma's heart sank at the thought, but she forced herself to stay calm. "If they wanted to hurt us, they would have done it already," she argued. "They're not attacking. They're watching, testing. We need to understand them before we do anything reckless." Clara nodded in agreement. "Emma's right. Those creatures are intelligent. You saw how they reacted to Clara's backpack. They weren't being aggressive. They were curious." Matt frowned, but didn't argue further. Instead, he turned to the others. "Fine, but we need to be ready. If they show up again, we can't let our guard down." The next morning, Rachel called everyone to the school. She had spent hours examining the glowing substance and had discovered something remarkable. "It's alive," she explained, pointing to the microscope. "Not in the way bacteria or cells are alive, but it absorbs light, converts it into energy. That's why it glows." Emma leaned closer, squinting at the tiny sample under the lens. "So, these creatures feed on darkness?" she asked. "Not exactly," Rachel replied. "They use darkness to survive. Light seems to weaken them, or maybe confuse them. That screech they made when Matt got too close, it might have been a defense mechanism, like they were protecting their territory." Matt crossed his arms. "Great, so they're nocturnal predators that don't like sunlight. That doesn't change the fact that they're dangerous." Just then, the front door burst open, and Jacob stumbled inside. His clothes were torn, his face pale and streaked with dirt. Everyone rushed to him, bombarding him with questions, but he held up a hand to silence them. "They took me," Jacob said breathlessly, sinking into a chair. "They didn't hurt me, not really. They tested me." Emma knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "What do you mean, tested you?" Jacob closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. "Bright lights, loud noises. They put me in some kind of chamber and watched how I reacted. It was like they were studying me, trying to understand what I am." Rachel exchanged a glance with Emma. "That fits with what we've seen. They're curious about us, just like we're curious about them." Jacob nodded weakly. "But they're not mindless monsters. They communicate with each other, clicks, hums, patterns of light from their bodies. I couldn't understand it, but it's clear they're organized, intelligent." Matt sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Even if they're not hostile, we can't ignore the damage they've done. Missing livestock, destroyed property. People are scared. If we don't do something, there's going to be panic." Emma stood up, her expression determined. "Then we find a way to talk to them. Show them we're not a threat. If we fight back, it'll only make things worse." The room fell silent, as everyone considered her words. For now, they had no choice but to prepare and hope that understanding could replace fear before it was too late. Days passed, and the town grew restless. News of the strange creatures spread quickly, fueled by rumors and half-truths. Some people claimed the aliens were planning an invasion, while others thought they were simply dangerous animals that needed to be hunted down. The tension was palpable, and it didn't help that sightings of the glowing-eyed beings became more frequent. They lingered at the edges of the forest, watching the town with an unsettling patience. Emma tried to keep everyone calm, but it was getting harder. She spent hours talking to neighbors, explaining what Jacob had seen and urging them not to jump to conclusions. "If we attack them, they'll see us as enemies," she said over and over again. "We need to show them we're not a threat." But not everyone agreed. Matt, along with several other townsfolk, began organizing patrols around the outskirts of the town. Armed with flashlights, rifles, and makeshift tools, they took turns standing guard at night. "Better safe than sorry," Matt told Emma when she confronted him about it. "I'm not risking lives based on guesswork." Meanwhile, Rachel worked tirelessly in her classroom, studying the glowing substance and trying to learn more about the creatures. With Jacob's descriptions of their behavior and the samples they'd collected, she pieced together a theory. "They're using light as a weapon, or maybe a tool," she explained during one of their meetings. Simply put, bright lights seemed to disorient them. It wasn't much, but it gave the group an idea. "What if we use that against them?" Matt suggested. "Set up floodlights around the perimeter of the town. If they come near, we can blind them or drive them away." Emma shook her head immediately. "That's just another form of attack. We're not solving anything by fighting back." Jacob chimed in, his voice quiet but firm. "She's right. These creatures are smart. If we provoke them, they'll retaliate. And trust me, they're stronger than they look." The debate went on for hours, but eventually, cooler heads prevailed. Emma proposed a compromise. They would set up the floodlights, but only as a deterrent, not to harm the creatures. At the same time, she and Rachel would continue studying the glowing residue, hoping to find a way to communicate or negotiate with the aliens. Reluctantly, Matt agreed, though he made it clear he still believed force might be necessary. As the days turned into a week, the plan came together. Floodlights powered by generators lined the edges of the town, casting wide beams into the surrounding woods. Noise machines, modified speakers designed to emit high-pitched frequencies, were placed strategically near areas where the creatures had been spotted. The townspeople hoped the combination of light and sound would keep the aliens at bay without escalating the situation. But despite their efforts, the creatures didn't retreat. Instead, they adapted. One night, Emma woke to the sound of shattering glass. Rushing outside, she saw that several of the floodlights had been destroyed, their bulbs smashed by sharp claws. In the distance, the faint glow of alien eyes flickered between the trees. The noise machines had no effect. The creatures ignored the screeching sounds entirely. "It's like they're learning," Rachel said the next morning, examining the wreckage. "Testing our defenses." Matt clenched his fists. "Then we hit them harder. Brighter lights, louder noises. We can't let them win." "No," Emma snapped, surprising even herself with her sharp tone. "Escalating this will only make things worse. Haven't you been listening? They're intelligent. If we keep pushing, they'll push back, and they've already shown they're stronger than us." The argument ended in a stalemate. While Matt prepared for a more aggressive approach, Emma and Rachel focused on finding a peaceful solution. Using the knowledge gained from the glowing residue, they constructed small devices that mimicked the aliens' natural environment. Pockets of artificial darkness created by absorbing ambient light. It was risky, but Emma believed it might be enough to confuse the creatures long enough to establish contact. That night, under the cover of darkness, Emma, Jacob, and Rachel ventured into the woods, carrying the devices. Their goal was simple: lure the aliens into a controlled area and observe them closely. As they moved deeper into the forest, the air grew heavy with anticipation. Every step felt like walking into the unknown. When they activated the devices, the reaction was immediate. The creatures emerged from the shadows, drawn to the patches of artificial darkness. For the first time, the humans saw them up close, not as threats, but as beings trying to survive in a world they didn't fully understand. The moment the artificial darkness devices were activated, the forest seemed to come alive. The creatures moved cautiously toward the patches of shadow, their glowing eyes dimming slightly as they entered the zones created by Emma and her team. It was clear the aliens were drawn to the simulated environment, almost like moths to a flame. But in reverse, instead of light, they sought the comfort of darkness. Emma held her breath, clutching the small device tightly in her hands. She had hoped this would work, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. The creatures weren't attacking or retreating. They simply stood there, tilting their heads and clicking softly to one another. Jacob watched them closely, his heart pounding. "They're curious," he whispered, "like they're trying to figure out what we're doing." Rachel nodded, scribbling notes in a small notebook. "This is incredible. They're not just reacting. They're observing, maybe even learning." But the calm didn't last long. From deeper within the woods, a low hum began to build, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't the clicking sounds the creatures usually made. It was different, almost mechanical. Before anyone could react, several more aliens appeared, surrounding the group. These new arrivals were larger, their bodies sleeker and more menacing. One of them emitted a sharp screech that sent vibrations through the ground, causing everyone to stagger backward. Matt, who had insisted on coming along despite Emma's protests, raised his rifle instinctively. "I knew this wouldn't end peacefully," he muttered, aiming at the nearest creature. "No," Emma shouted, stepping in front of him. "Don't shoot. They're not attacking yet." Her words hung in the air as the larger creatures advanced slowly, their movements deliberate. Unlike the others, these beings didn't seem curious. They looked angry. Their wings flared slightly, catching the faint moonlight, and their claws clicked together in a rhythmic pattern that felt almost threatening. Jacob stepped forward cautiously, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "We're not here to fight," he said loudly, though he doubted the creatures understood him. "We just want to talk." To everyone's surprise, one of the larger aliens stopped moving. Its head tilted sharply, as if processing Jacob's tone rather than his words. Then, without warning, it extended a clawed hand toward him, pointing directly at the artificial darkness device he carried. The message was clear: give it to them, or face consequences. Emma hesitated, glancing at Rachel and Matt. This was uncharted territory. Handing over the device might appease the creatures, but it could also give them an advantage. On the other hand, refusing could provoke an attack. The decision had to be made quickly. "Give it to them," Emma said finally, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's not worth risking our lives over." Jacob nodded and carefully placed the device on the ground. Backing away slowly, the alien scooped it up with surprising gentleness, inspecting it for a moment before emitting a series of rapid clicks. The other creatures responded immediately, retreating into the shadows with the device in tow. For a few tense moments, the humans stood frozen, unsure if the encounter was over. But when the forest fell silent again, it was clear the aliens had left for now. As they walked back to town, Matt shook his head in frustration. "That was pointless. We gave them exactly what they wanted." "It wasn't pointless," Emma countered. "We learned something important tonight. They're not mindless beasts. They negotiate. And if they can negotiate, then maybe we can find common ground." Rachel agreed, her expression thoughtful. "If we can keep studying them and figuring out how they communicate, we might actually have a chance at coexisting." The group returned to town exhausted but hopeful. What they had witnessed was proof that the creatures weren't purely hostile. There was intelligence behind their actions, and perhaps with time, understanding could replace fear. But as dawn broke over the horizon, none of them could shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger challenge. The next few days were a blur of activity as Emma, Jacob, Rachel, and the rest of the group worked tirelessly to refine their plan. The encounter in the woods had proven two things. The aliens were intelligent, and they responded to artificial darkness. Armed with this knowledge, Emma proposed scaling up their efforts. Instead of small devices, they would create larger zones of simulated darkness around key areas where the creatures frequently appeared. If they could control these zones, they might be able to guide the aliens' movements and perhaps even communicate with them. Matt still wasn't convinced. This is too risky, he argued during one of their planning sessions. What if they see it as a trap? Or what if they decide to attack anyway? It's not a trap, Emma replied firmly. It's a way to show them we're willing to meet them halfway. If we keep escalating with weapons and hostility, we'll never get anywhere. Rachel added her support, pointing to her notes from the previous night. Their behavior shows patterns. They react to light and sound, but they also respond to calm actions. If we approach this carefully, we can avoid conflict. With no better alternatives on the table, Matt reluctantly agreed to help. The townspeople rallied together, pooling resources to build the larger devices. Old car batteries powered the machines, while sheets of reflective material scavenged from local farms helped absorb and redirect light. It was a patchwork effort, but everyone pitched in, driven by the hope that this might finally bring peace. By the time the devices were ready, the tension in town was at an all-time high. Reports of alien sightings near the outskirts had increased, and several more floodlights had been destroyed. People were scared, and whispers of forming armed militias grew louder. Emma knew they were running out of time. That night, she led a small team, Jacob, Rachel, Matt, and a few volunteers, into the woods to set up the new zones. The forest was eerily quiet as they worked, the only sounds coming from their footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Each device was placed strategically, creating a network of artificial darkness that stretched across a wide area. As the last machine hummed to life, Emma felt a mix of fear and anticipation. Would the creatures come? And if they did, how would they react? It didn't take long to find out. Within minutes, glowing eyes began appearing in the shadows, drawn to the darkened patches like magnets. The aliens moved cautiously at first, their clicking growing louder as more of them arrived. But unlike before, they didn't seem hostile. Instead, they gathered around the edges of the zones, studying the humans with an intensity that made Emma's skin crawl. Then something unexpected happened. One of the creatures stepped into the center of a zone and emitted a series of rhythmic clicks, its body glowing faintly in response. Another creature joined in, mimicking the pattern, and soon the entire group was engaged in what looked like a coordinated display of light and sound. "They're communicating," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Not just with each other, but maybe with us." Emma nodded slowly. "They're showing us they understand. Maybe they're trying to say something." Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer to the nearest alien, holding up her hands to signal she meant no harm. The creature tilted its head, watching her closely. Then, to everyone's astonishment, it extended a clawed hand toward her, not aggressively, but almost as if offering a gesture of trust. For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with uncertainty, but also possibility. Finally, Emma reached out tentatively, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the alien's claw. A low hum resonated through the forest, and the creatures clicked softly, retreating back into the shadows. As the teen returned to town, the weight of what had just happened settled over them. They hadn't solved everything, but they had taken a crucial step forward. For the first time, there was hope, not just for survival, but for understanding. The days that followed the encounter in the forest brought a fragile sense of peace to the town. The aliens no longer attacked livestock or destroyed property, and sightings became less frequent. It was as though they were giving the humans time to adjust, just as the townspeople were doing for them. Emma and her team continued studying the glowing residue and observing patterns in the creature's behavior, determined to build on the tentative connection they had made. Rachel spent hours analyzing the clicking sounds the aliens used to communicate. She recorded their patterns and played them back through speakers, hoping to mimic their language. At first, there was no response, but one evening, When she repeated a specific sequence of clicks near the edge of the woods, something remarkable happened. A single alien emerged from the shadows, its body glowing faintly. It tilted its head, then responded with a series of clicks that matched Rachel's recording. "They're learning," Rachel said excitedly, turning to Emma and Jacob. "They understand we're trying to talk to them." Encouraged by this breakthrough, the group worked even harder to bridge the gap between species. They began leaving small offerings, fruits, grains, and other harmless items, near the artificial darkness zones. To their surprise, the aliens started reciprocating, leaving behind shimmering fragments of the glowing substance they seemed to value so much. It wasn't just trade, it felt like trust. Matt remained cautious, keeping his rifle close at all times. "I'm glad things are calmer," he admitted during one of their meetings, "but I still don't fully trust them. What happens if they change their minds?" Emma understood his concerns but chose to focus on the progress they'd made. "We can't control everything," she said gently. "All we can do is keep showing them we're not a threat. If we stay calm and patient, maybe they'll see we're worth trusting too." As weeks turned into months, the relationship between the humans and the aliens grew stronger. The creatures stopped lurking at the edges of the forest and instead ventured closer to the town, always staying within the safety of the artificial darkness zones. They allowed the humans to observe them more closely, revealing intricate details about their lives. The way they communicated through light patterns, how they cared for their young, and even how they mourned their dead. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma stood on a hill overlooking the valley. Below her, the town buzzed with quiet activity. Floodlights still illuminated parts of the perimeter, but they were no longer weapons. They were signals, guiding the aliens to safe zones where both species could interact without fear. In the distance, she could see the faint glow of alien eyes moving through the trees, a reminder of how far they'd come. Jacob joined her, handing her a cup of hot tea. "Do you think we'll ever really understand each other?" he asked softly. Emma took a sip, smiling faintly. "Maybe not completely. But we've already learned something important. That fear doesn't have to control us. We thought we were the ones who feared the dark, but now, we've become the hunters of understanding." Her words stayed with him as they watched the stars appear one by one in the sky. The forest was alive with soft clicks and hums, blending with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. For the first time in months, the night felt peaceful, not empty or menacing, but full of possibility. The aliens may never fully integrate into human life, and humans might never step foot in their hidden world. But what mattered most was that both sides had chosen coexistence over conflict. Together, they had turned fear into curiosity, hostility into trust, and darkness into a shared space where two very different species could meet, not as enemies, but as neighbors. And as Emma gazed out at the glowing horizon, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories weren't about domination or survival. They were about finding a way to live alongside the unknown, and discovering that the unknown wasn't so scary after all.